Welcome to Slow News Day. I'm Steve Poikinen.
And I'm Sarah Hall.
We are here highlighting artists, activists, organizers, and all-around agitators who are pushing back against late-stage capitalism here in the heart of the empire. Joining us today is the host of Working People podcast, California native who decided to go freeze his ass off in the Midwest. We are stoked to have on the show a true spokesman for workers, Maximillian Alvarez. Man, welcome on. How you doing?
Hey guys, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to get to chat to both of you.
Absolutely. So you're in Ann Arbor right now. I was just telling you before we started that I grew up in Anderson, Indiana, which was for about 60 or 70 years a GM town. Chris Hedges actually wrote about it in his most recent book, Capitalism: A Farewell Tour. And it was one of those situations where once NAFTA passed, like 2/3 of the town collapsed. It was GM provided, it was about 60 to 62% of the employment of the entire town. And now, if you look at it online, it's famous for two things, which is being one of the top 5 ghettos in the state of Indiana. And the other is they host a large, like, Kent Revival church thing once a week where members of the Church of God, not the snake handling Church of God, just the super evangelical Church of God, come in RVs and tents and whatnot, set up on the campus of a private Christian university and have a week long of revival church. And that's like, oh, and
Are you sure there's no snakes?
And it was the district that Mike Pence was the representative for before he became governor, before he became vice president. So it was like test ground for how to bankrupt and exploit a community and create a drug problem.
And so I guess to answer Sarah's question, there are indeed snakes. They just may have arms.
It's true.
I set them up.
No, I mean, like, and you know, at Working People, we finished off season 1 with this big, like, 5-episode series on the GM layoffs that were announced, you know, just after Thanksgiving, when a lot of workers were coming back from, you know, a long weekend to go back to work, and you know, just weeks before the, you know, holidays. And you know, this is like you said, like this is you know, a you kind of point and click, you know, like in places across the Rust Belt, and this is the story that you're going to hear, right? You're going to hear not just about kind of deindustrialization in the abstract, but you're going to see through the stories of the people who live here, like what it looks like when a community just implodes, when its like primary source of jobs and wealth, you know, like is just excised from the heart of the community. And it's horrible. And I mean, like, you know, but and we all know this, and you know, it's a story that's been told so many times. But I guess what you know, I wanted to do with the Working People series was to really emphasize for people like the real human consequences of this, and the complicated kind of tissue of these communities that can't just be repaired with like some, you know, bullshit rhetoric from
Bootstraps.
Trump, or, you know, yeah,
Just bootstrap your way out of it, kid.
Exactly. Yeah. I like challenge any conservative dickhead to go to Lordstown, Ohio, stand on a corner and just tell all the GM workers who were laid off that they just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. See how long you last.
What's hilarious, though, is that they will blame Bill Clinton for that, and rightfully so, but fail to make the connection that it was Bill Clinton who was allowed to provide cover for that right-wing legislation that George H.W. Bush failed to get passed. And were it not for the third-way neoliberalism of Bill Clinton and successive Democrats in office, that things like NAFTA wouldn't be able to pass. So while they attribute the blame to it, they're not looking at the larger picture, and then we'll turn around and say, like, oh no, there's a massive difference between Republicans and Democrats. They occupy 100% of the space of the political spectrum.
Well, and so I was having a discussion like this with my folks when I was back home over the winter break, and I think that this is as good an entry point as any to thinking about the larger forces that are at work in this kind of thing, right? Because again, like one of the things that I try to highlight, not just with the GM series at Working People, but with the show itself, right, is that these are people's lives that we're talking about, right? These are families, communities that are just being absolutely destroyed and forgotten. And when you talk to them, because like I mentioned Lordstown when I did that episode, and I talked to 3 different workers, 2 of them were Trump voters, one of them is a self-proclaimed anarchist, right? So there's a diversity of voices for these plant workers. But I think that all of them would kind of tell you that at this point, the like who or what's to blame discussion does kind of it's not that it's not important, but it does ring kind of hollow for people who are now worried about how they're going to pay rent. But I do think that in terms of thinking about strategy and thinking about what we can actually do for ourselves and our fellow workers moving forward, right? Thinking about where like Clinton and the New Democrats kind of play into this larger narrative of globalization, deindustrialization, neoliberalization, all that stuff, is vital. And I think you're absolutely right that the whole New Democratic kind of wave was premised on this fucking oh shit, can I curse here?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right, I curse like a sailor, so yeah, just heads up.
So here's the thing, dude. We're you're on because of the work that you've done in your podcast, what you stand for. You are allowed to say what the fuck ever you want to say. This is a show that highlights people. It's not like a combative setup, man. You
Not a
fucking
debate stage.
you be yourself. I mean, like that's what we want.
And thank
Well, I
you
love
for
that.
being here too.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I want to make sure that we have some time to discuss why I think what you're doing is so important, because I was just on a small podcast in like the little panhandle of West Virginia that's like the official podcast of the local IWW there. Mandatory OT is what it's called. And I was talking to the boys there, and this was what I was so excited about, is like I think that in 2019 really needs to be the year that those of us on the left need to make a much more concerted and genuine good faith effort to really kind of promote each other, celebrate each other's work, connect our various operations, and really kind of build a sense of collective identity and solidarity, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to combat the forces that we're up against.
Absolutely.
And to that point, about those large forces that we're up against, going back to what I was saying about Clinton, right? You put it perfectly well that like the entire strategy of the New Democrats, and this is what I hear every time like Hillary Clinton goes on the news and is just like, oh, if progressives don't want to be Democrats, then they could just go somewhere else, right? What Clinton and her ilk are leaving out is that they were integral in redefining what the Democratic Party is, and in so doing, they shifted the Overton window of Democratic politics towards their strategy of like beating Republicans by being Republicans.
Right.
Like, I
Right.
mean, that's the new Democratic strategy. That's what Bill Clinton's, like tough on crime stuff was that, if you can't, beat them by opposing them, just adopt their principles and call them your own under your own party. And that's been the Democratic strategy, and that has played a central part in screwing over working people, regardless of which party is in power. And so, I think that progressives and leftists need to be able to respond to that and say, like, no, like we are reclaiming the Democratic Party, we are redefining the Democratic Party, and I'm not even a full subscriber to the belief that like we can change what we need to through the Democratic Party, but I do think that we need to have many, fronts upon which, like this fight is going to take place. So for those who are doing that work to shift the window in electoral politics, even if that isn't necessarily my own preferred strategy, I do think it's important. I think it's necessary for like the popularization of socialist politics, yada, yada, yada. So for those who are doing that, I do think that, you need to have a very quick and powerful retort to the New Democrats that like they are in fact complicit in more ways than one in the erosion of the Democratic Party's link to the working class, to labor unions, right? Thomas Frank, the founder of the Baffler, where I'm a columnist,
Okay.
right? He writes a lot about this, that the Democrats, they abdicated their role as kind of like the party of organized labor, right? They made a very deliberate and concerted turn away from the working class, from labor unions, towards kind of the more technocratic, globalized elite, right? Because they took the working class for granted, right? They assumed that that we would just follow suit, and 2016 is as good an example as any that that's not going to be the case. And so I know I'm kind of firing off at all cylinders, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that while Clinton and the New Democrats and NAFTA absolutely had a pivotal role to play in kind of the destruction that we are seeing across the United States, not just in the Rust Belt, that we kind of call deindustrialization. That they're one gear in a much larger machine of global capital, right? That has kind of co-opted the kind of political establishment writ large, right? Because we also, if you talk to the workers, right, like they talk about things going all the way back to the 70s, even the 60s,
Sure.
right? There's a lot of blowback, to a lot of ways that like the state and capital essentially kind of broke the New Deal order, and in the process, part of that process rather was breaking the need to break the back of organized labor power with people like Reagan, right? I did a bonus episode in the GM series with Sam Gindin, who is a brilliant writer and activist up in Canada. And he talks about this. He talks about how the neoliberal project is essentially a project designed to counter things like the stagflation epidemic in the early 70s with the disciplining of organized labor. And then on top of that, you have things like
It's an interesting choice of words.
automation of manufacturing operations. You have, right, like the big three, GM, Chrysler, Ford, making boneheaded decisions, not just to like line their own pockets, but to essentially hedge their bets on gas guzzling, planet killing SUVs and thus getting out competed by like Japanese car manufacturers. I mean, like, so it's a big, sprawling, complicated picture, and I think what working people in our own small way is trying to do is bring the conversation back down to the human level and to emphasize the fact that without us, right, you know, like, this wealth would never have been created. These CEOs would never have been able to live the lavish lifestyle that they do, and to live as unbeholden to the people that they depend on as they can, right? And that moving forward, if we do not center, you know, the real lives and health of our communities and our planet and our political economy, we're fucked.
Yeah. Well, here and I agree with what you're saying. My understanding of neoliberalism as a thing is that it was conceived in the wake of the 1972 presidential election, where the Democrats had their never again moment. And that never again moment was never again will
You're talking about after McGovern got his ass whooped?
Yeah. Never again will we allow progressive ideas to interfere with the will of the elites of this country. And from 72 on, that was the year they came up with superdelegates. There was a track of you're abandoning unions, that a lot of that had to do with union bosses siding with management in the late 60s over the 1968 convention, where the fucking hippies ruined everything, right? And George Meany was over there saying, oh no, it's cool, me and Daley are sending the cops to go beat the shit out of women, kids, whoever. You know, if they're unarmed, dude, we're cracking skulls. And that just kind of, it said out loud to management, if you will, that we're on your side. We side with money. And the progression over the last 40 years, really, is you're right, becoming Republicans to be Republicans. The daylight that you find is over these sociological, social justice, you know, not domestic policy, not the. We say all the time that as long as there's, as long as management is allowed to make 100% of the decisions, workers aren't going to have any representation in the political sphere. And over the last 40 years or more, we have allowed elected officials to work in tandem with management to make 100% of the decisions. So as workers, we are, of course, left out of the conversation. It's not that we don't have a seat at the table. It's we're not allowed in the same fucking building, you know? And when we try to go into the building, they call the police. And that's just, that's historically been the pattern. Where we're at, pardon me, in 2019 is we're at a point to where it looks like people are starting to become aware of the fact that we live in an oligarchy. Like Jimmy Carter says out loud, we live in an oligarchy. He would know. So the pushback is so tremendous that they're banning Twitter accounts for posting Kamala Harris's record. You know, they're, you fly. I think that because you highlight unions specifically in teacher strikes and strikes we're in the part of the left that says heads on pikes and general strikes or nothing fucking changes. Like that's where we're at. We have seen through strikes success. We have seen that strikes make a giant difference, and if we withhold our labor, the machine stops working. And we know that there is power in a movement, and so we're trying to get, like, I don't know, man. I guess it's kind of like share by highlighting other people, by trying to do shows about other people's shows. I think we're just trying to expand the collective consciousness of the people that are coming into the reality that the system that we live in is rigged, and it's rigged on purpose, and it's rigged by bastards, and those bastards have names and addresses.
Boom. There it is.
Hell yeah. And you know, I think and like I was saying on the Mandatory OT podcast, right? Like there's obviously no question that the forces that we're up against are many and vicious, right? And that the future that we are facing and the reality in which we are currently embroiled is fucking dark, right? You know, like and it brings with it human suffering, rising fascism, increased wealth inequality. Like we're staring down the barrel of very, very terrifying things. At the same time, I think you're absolutely right that there are, you know, really important and beautiful things happening that were almost unthinkable 10 years ago. Right, and the fact that so many of us are kind of connecting the dots, going on each other's shows, going to each other's strikes, building that kind of solidarity, right? Like I think it's hugely consequential, right? I was just reading, I think I posted on the Working People social media, an article in Bloomberg that was about like the resurgence of American labor, and it pointed out that, you know, by all accounts, there were like, I think 7 strikes in 2017, right? With everything going on with Janus, like it just seemed like labor was really on its last breath. And then the number of strikes tripled in 2018. And we are off to, you know, a great start here in 2019. And I think it's because of what you said, right? People are realizing that we are living through the effects of decades and decades of disinvestment in public goods, in, you know, the absolute, you know, like fleecing of the public and our wallets by the oligarchs who, you know, rule our political system, our political economy, and our media, right? We are living through the effects of this kind of ideological air conditioning that we've been hearing for decades and decades, that unions had a purpose in the past but they don't anymore, that the market will kind of solve all of our problems, right? You know, that you know, with the advent of Web 2.0, that, you know, greater workers' ability to be like their own boss and kind of work as independent contractors was like a good thing, right? Yeah. Like we've been getting fed all of this shit from the top down for decades and decades. And I think that, you know, especially after the financial crisis 10 years ago, when we saw that like the forces that be, you know, orchestrated a recovery that only exacerbated, right, the power and wealth disparity like in this country, and that only made things worse for working people around the country. Right? People have had enough.
Did you know that the total amount for that bailout was $16.8 trillion, and we're still paying it to Wall Street banks today? Not the 700 billion that they sold. 16.8 trillion.
I mean, I got a brother,
skins.
Zach, who's an economist, and we're actually working on doing a spin-off podcast and doing some kind of writing together. But like, he's a brilliant economist. I'm a lefty nut job, and together I think we have some really interesting discussions about this kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, like, sometimes I think I'm flying off the handle, and then I talk to him, and he's like, bro, you have no idea how bad it is, right? You have no idea how much working people have been getting, like, just robbed blind, right? And how complicit our political establishment has been in this. And like, his point is always that, like, especially in 2020, but also moving forward, he's like, leftists and progressives are going to get their time at bat, right? And I think now is it, right? Like, now is a time when we are, feeling the extreme bleeding edge of the contradictions of capitalism pressing, like, upon us, and slicing our necks and bodies and souls open. And we have a choice, right, to either divert our energies back into, like, limp dick, milquetoast, democratic establishment politics that are just going to essentially kick the can down the road, or to really kind of collectively say that this system is shit, we need a new one.
So here's the thing. We're not going to get that through a legislative process. We're not going to get that through electoral politics. And I think that you know as well as I do that it's asses in the street that make a difference. It's people in communities saying, no, our planet's worth saving. It is necessary to create a sustainable environment for future generations. We are not going to get that through the crony capitalism or laissez-faire capitalism that you fucking psychos preach. We do not want to reinvent the wheel. We want to break the fucking wheel. And that's not a process that happens through the ballot box. We interview a lot of candidates and some elected officials on this show, and they all understand. They've all understood that. They have, and every single one of them has all said, no, it's you guys. You guys need to get out. You guys need to come in groups into the building, and that's how it's going to happen, because the only organization on the planet that has a higher recidivism rate than prison is the United States Congress. And
yeah, keep going.
No, so you get an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez who, bless her, has put
easy now.
has put the Green New Deal into the conversation, and who has put what modern monetary theory proponents have been screaming for online for 2 years and in economic circles for 20, that federal taxes don't fund federal spending. We have the money to pay for the Green New Deal. We have it because we have a free-floating fiat currency, and if we want $716 billion for the military budget, some keystrokes get entered at the Fed, and the money goes into bank accounts to be spent. That's how it fucking works. And now that argument is getting some play. And your brother may be able to confirm this, but we are well overdue for a financial crash.
That's his. He's like, the British are coming, kind of ringing the bell.
So yeah,
every day he's like, the crash is coming.
J.P. Morgan CEO, right before Christmas, it was between Christmas and New Year's, because that's when you give everybody the really fucking bad news, because no one's paying attention. J.P. Morgan CEO said that financial collapse is coming in the spring, summer of 2020, which means this summer, because JP Morgan CEO wants it to surprise me and you.
Yeah, I mean, Zach definitely has hedged that the crash will, kind of precipitate around the same time. I don't want to butcher how he would put it, so
Yeah.
I'll refer people to him, and I'll put you guys in contact. But I do think I'm trying to get him to write more and get his voice out there more, because I think that he has a lot to offer that the left is currently lacking. But to the larger point that you're both bringing up, in the same vein as kind of what you're doing with your show to kind of build these connections, build solidarity with, these many scattered operations, whether they be kind of local labor unions, podcasts, writers, worker collectives, all these kinds of things. It is absolutely important that we do kind of build that sort of infrastructure of solidarity between us, and use more of our collective power, right, to fight against this kind of capitalist pillage and murder. In that same vein, I tend to be someone who is of the mind that that we need all of it. Right, that like, as far as like, I'm a dues paying member of DSA, right? I have tons of friends in DSA. My partner is co-chair of the local DSA chapter, right? I mean, and I have a lot of problems with DSA, especially this like move that is on the horizon, or that is already happening at the moment, where one fucking committee is trying to completely restructure the organization so that it basically becomes like a super PAC for Bernie's 2020 run, at the expense of the local kind of community projects that is the bread and butter of DSA, like fixing brake lights, like supporting local unions, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's a fundamentally terrible idea, right? So, but at the same time, right, like, I will throw my weight behind anyone who I think is, in their own large or small way, right, like moving the needle, right, pushing the field towards a mass class consciousness, towards a broad consensus from the working class that we are being fucked over, that the system itself is unsustainable, that traditional party politics and bipartisan, collaboration in the pillage of the working class is not going to get us, the more sustainable political economy that we need. Like, anything that pushes us towards that, I'm for. Like, and I think that we're not necessarily at a point where we can I guess shore up our collective efforts and divert them towards one single thing, right? I think we need to set fires wherever like we can, and fan them whenever we can. And so, like you were saying with like Ocasio-Cortez introducing like an outline for the Green New Deal, great. I'm all for it, right? I don't think that's going to solve everything. I don't think the 2020 election is going to solve everything.
No.
But like, if in the moment it is helping like my parents and like the people I grew up with become just a little more radicalized, and thus a little more open to discussing like why socialism is necessary, then I'm for that. And so I'm more in the mode right now of like supporting comrades, like even those with whom I disagree, tactically, culturally, the ways that they operate in organizing meetings, any of that stuff. Like, like I'm more in the camp that like, we need all of it right now, and we need to storm the castle.
Just because I want the fully automated gay luxury space communism now doesn't mean that like I am in any way, shape, or form delineating the efforts or the victories that people who are working towards that get when they get them. That's not at all. I'd go forth and do radical shit. You know, if that means
Shout out to LA Teachers Union.
Yeah, shout out to Justin Cummings, DSA back vice mayor and city council member here in Santa Cruz, has been on the show. Like, go forth and do radical shit as much as possible. If you're doing that with your show, fucking A, dude, great. If you're doing it as an elected official in just screaming into your own fucking megaphone because nobody else around you is listening, man, do that, because people will eventually listen. People are listening. They just don't feel empowered until they see you get out there and do that fucking radical shit, homie. Like, that's, I'm for people taking a stand wherever and however they can, pushing us towards that, you know. But yeah,
right. And it's like, and to your point though, right? It's like, you know, if you're you know, playing Smash Mouth football and you're driving the ball 1 yard, 5 yards, 3 yards down the field, right? You don't get to the 40-yard line and be like, okay, that's it,
right?
We're done, right? Like, no, you keep fucking going until, you know, like, we get fully automated luxury gay space communism, right? Like, I mean, and so I think that's the essential, you know, like, follow-up to everything that we're saying here, which you were already saying, right? Is that, like, do all of it and keep going, right? You know, like, don't like, you know, celebrate the victories like when they come, but do not lose sight of the bigger picture. And this is something that, you know, I talk to comrades about all the time, right? Because especially in the left writing world, right, everyone is just super, you know, like, just obsessed with, like, picking each other off and telling their followers, like, who sucks, who they shouldn't listen to, which idea is, like, crap, and who they should follow, who they shouldn't. It's very just cliquey and self-absorbed. And I've actually found way more solidarity and a sense of collectivity in the podcasting world than I ever found in the writing world. And I don't know if that's just because we can actually see each other and talk to each other, but either way, I'm all for it. But when I talk to, you know, like, you know, YDSA folks here in Ann Arbor, or when I talk to, you know, like a student group for the Campus Anti-Fascist Network, which I, you know, co-founded here, the chapter here at U of M, right? When I talk to them about this kind of stuff, like, a lot of it is focused on, like, who's right? Who do we follow? Like, which path kind of, like, do we go in, or which path do we take? And, you know, I think that, you know, like we're saying here, the important thing is just, like, you know, have a sense of the big picture, right? You know, like, if I don't like the whole Brooklyn bro lefty podcast world. I never have. My outspoken, you know, like, dissatisfaction with the Brooklyn left scene is well known. But at the same time, I'm not gonna, like, shit on, like, you know, my friends who, like, love Chapo Trap House, or who, like, call themselves, like, dirtbag leftists. Like, fine, but just, like, that can't just be it.
Can we agree, though, that Pod Save America is shit?
Yes.
All right, cool. That's what I'd play. I
will co-sign that Pod Save America is fucking milquetoast, reactionary, just new Democrat horseshit. Do not listen to it.
It's for people. It's for people who need to hear Sam Cedars' message from frat boys.
Exactly. If you want better podcasts to listen to Slow News Day. Listen to Mandatory OT. Listen to the Trillbilly Workers Party. Listen to Season of the Bitch. Listen to the Nostalgia Trap. Listen to the Current Affairs podcast. Listen to Working People, right? Listen to Citations Needed, right? I mean, there are so many great leftist podcasts that are doing excellent work, both locally in their small media markets and nationally, right? Again, we need all of it. And if you also like, you know, some of the you know, Chapo, Cumtown, Pod Damn America, fine. Like, I listen to them on occasion, it's fine. But it's like that, I just have a bigger sense that it's like, okay, I know what this is for. It's for, like, if I need a laugh and want to just kind of, like, I don't know, like, just bathe in, you know, like, a sense of kind of, like, an ironic view of understanding why politics is so shit at the moment. You know, to the point y'all were making about, God, kind of collective action getting the goods, right? And us talking about how, we're really at this kind of boiling point for a new labor movement. Feels like it really started with the West Virginia teacher strikes last year and has just kind of moved all the way through, the teacher strikes also in Oklahoma, Arizona, a lot of conservative states, and that was kind of what made the UTLA strike kind of a new moment in this labor movement because it was in a blue state, right? But a state that has in a district that has kind of seen just massive public disinvestment in public education, especially since the recession. This is what a lot of the teachers. So the season two premiere of Working People was a big special on the UTLA strike.
Yeah.
Where I talked to 3 teachers in the district.
We listened to that episode, man. It was a great episode, by the way.
Awesome, thank you. I mean, I'm constantly just amazed at, I think like when I started the show, and I wrote about this in a piece for Current Affairs where I said like I knew why I wanted to do the show, a show based on just interviewing fellow workers around the country. I had no idea if it would actually be something people would want to listen to. And I think I'm just constantly, taken aback by just how compelling everyone's story is, right? Like, it's kind of like I don't even need to worry anymore because I think to the overall philosophy behind the show, right, and behind our various efforts to rehumanize workers in our own eyes and in each other's eyes, right? If you actually give yourself and your coworkers, your neighbors, your family members the time and attention to really just, talk this way, to really tell their stories the ways that they want them to be told, right? Everyone has, just such incredible stories. Everyone's lived complicated lives. Everyone is a complex person, but again, under late stage capitalism, right? Like we are constantly reminded that unless you have wealth and power and status, that your stories somehow count for less, right? And so the entire premise of Working People is to push against that. And in the process, right, share the stories of our fellow workers so that when other workers are listening to them, they feel less alone, they feel more connected to each other, and that we also, through these humanizing conversations, right, remind ourselves that we as human beings on this planet deserve better than this, right? And that it's going to be up to us to collectively demand better and to take back what's ours. And that comes through beautifully in the stories of the UTLA teachers in that episode, as well as the Sheraton hotel workers in Anaheim that we interviewed for the second episode. And actually the episode that I'm going to release later today or at the very latest tomorrow morning is with a professor at Wright State and they're currently striking, right? I mean, like, so they're like, normally I talk to like individual workers kind of just about their lives, their jobs, their dreams, their struggles, but it's not necessarily always attached to like some big strike that's going on or some big unionizing push, right? It started out more as just kind of like a where are workers now, who are they, what are they doing, right? But like it's gotten to the point, especially in the second season, where like strikes and these unionization efforts and all this amazing shit is just popping off everywhere, that the first 3 episodes of the season have all been kind of like based around one strike or another, right? And we can't even cover all of them, right? The Denver schools voted to strike at the end of last month. The Oakland teachers voted to strike, right? West Virginia teachers are back at it right now. Virginia teachers, right? Like there's
half
so much
of the globe is on
vital,
strike.
Necessary.
Oh, biscuit.
Can you hear us?
Oh shit.
There we go.
Yeah.
Hey,
Hello?
there you are.
Snap.
Hey.
Just a glitch.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. Half of the planet is on strike. India had like the largest strike in history with over 1 million people. France is on general strike.
On our
right
southern
now.
border, the maquiladora workers in Mexico are striking. Yeah.
It's bubbling, man. People are and I think I think independent media has a lot to do with it. People have access to a shared idea that workers deserve the means of production. And it's not like it's a brand new concept, but people are starting to realize that there is a shared consciousness in among workers that together we can make a difference. We live in one of the most income inequal towns on the planet in Santa Cruz County. There's everybody who has a job has a side hustle. Most people have a side hustle with their side hustle. Like I've got 3 kids. My bills are fucking ridiculous for just getting by. Rent is fucking outrageous. Like the average price of a 2-bedroom here is now $2,800 or 28 and change. It's wild, man. And
Sarah, what about you?
What about
what, like, does you have
I'm in the middle of trying to buy a home right now. I'm just I've worked for a living. I've worked consistently since I was 18 years old, registered to vote at 18, bought my first gun, and I'm halfway to the finish line and just starting to try to figure out what it means to buy a home. It's not like we got to shop around or anything like that or bid on a house. My husband just happened to be in one place for a long time. We had a rapport with our landlord. We got offered a crazy deal, and we're trying to shoot the hoops of doing that right now. So my brain was kind of in that last night. I managed to sleep for like 6 hours, so that was great. But up at 5, not going to say worried unconsolably, but shit is definitely stressful. I was having the thought while we were talking, though, that since they don't want to pay people to work full time, maybe we can strike in shifts,
That's how
because people will have 2 part-time jobs, but maybe we'll just work in striking there and we can do it in shifts.
Well, I mean, I actually think that like what we're seeing right now isn't that far off from that, right? Because in a way, these various like worker actions that we're seeing are kind of like their own shifts in a general strike for the common good. This is something you saw at UTLA, and it's something that the Wright State professors that I talked to, all said is that like, they are striking at a moment when contract negotiations are happening, but at the same time they are striking against what has been just this massive decades long just kind of uniform effort from the top down to push working people to the brink, to make it more and more impossible for us to get by on meager wages that have been stagnant while cost of living has just continued to rise, and while wealth inequality has just gotten worse, right? And the just like gradual desiccation of our public goods and our social safety nets, right? The evacuation of good paying jobs, either from the country to other parts of the world, or to mechanization or automation. Sorry, I mean, like they're just working people are being left with so few options, right? And as we have said a number of times in this conversation, right? Like we have no other option but to collectivize, push against this, seize the fucking means of production, break the wheel, as you said, and kind of build a new political economy that is both just, equitable, dignified, and environmentally sustainable,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And in
I'd
a way
really
that
like
is
to
kind of
see that for Steve's kids and for the children of this world. Like I have everyday stresses. I can't imagine what it's like to be a parent caught in the racket of this design between like public schools and a vaccination that might possibly kill your kid. It might save him, might kill him. I don't know. Yeah, I would just be and the way that our school system is, I kind of like manage to sidestep that by not having children. But I think that's the thing that probably stresses me out the most is what kind of world are we leaving for Steve's kids?
right, right, and you know, like I think if we're not talking about it that way, then there's something wrong. Like just before we started chatting, I was reading about how, you know, Nancy fucking Pelosi, this like, you know, Yas Queen resistance warrior who, you know, everyone is talking about like some stupid like clap that she gave at the State of the Union, and then the next day she turns around and like makes a joke about like the Green New Deal, right? You know,
Yeah.
like and talks about it in a very Trumpian kind of way. She's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's the green dream or whatever. It's like, no, it's not whatever. Like we are talking about, you know, the path towards creating a livable future. And that is non-negotiable, right? And if you are taking that lightly, if you are, you know, thinking it's just one issue among many, then you have made your position clear. Like this is something that the left, progressives, and increasingly the working class in general cannot negotiate on because it is our very fucking future that we're talking about. And I think, yeah, like it's just again, it's not something that that we can budge on. It's something that we have to keep moving that football down the field in all these different ways. And I think that that is what is so beautiful about these various kind of worker actions. I'm not saying that each one is, you know, ideologically uniform, but I am saying that it's much more it's much different than like, you know, the kind of traditional tactics of securing concessions from employers, right? You are, and that's also why you're seeing like at Wright State, UTLA, Oakland, Denver, you're not only seeing teachers striking, but you're seeing a lot of support from the students,
Right.
from their parents, from the community. Like at Wright State, I was just talking to a professor, and she was like, we have people driving in from all over the state or from outside of the state to show support and to stand with us on the picket line. And in LA, you had just this massive, like 80% of the district was in support of this. Like that is significant, right? Because for my entire lifetime, every time there is like some sort of organized worker action, you know, it is immediately followed by like all these various efforts from media, politicians to your neighbors to like put wedges in there and kind of like pit workers against the students that they're supposed to serve or like the customers and all this kind of bullshit, and people just aren't buying it anymore. And that is, I think, what is so significant about this strike wave kind of being a strike for workers in their kind of localized context, but also workers in their communities striking for this notion of the common good, right? That has been just eroded by neoliberal plunder and pillage for decades. And I think it's something that is new, that is different, and that in any way we possibly can, we should support. And to your point, Sarah, I think it is like I said, it's like we are general striking in shifts because it carries with it this vision for what like labor should be and what like a life lived, you know, like should mean in conversation with, you know, the environment, with our communities, with our very political economic system that governs like life around this world, right? Like and that is something that I think that the new labor movement has really reclaimed is a vision for what work is and what the economy should be for. And I think in that sense that gives me a lot of hope that you know, moving forward with these kind of actions that are being led by teachers, the vast majority of whom are women, right? You know, this working class movement that, as represented in our show, as represented in these strikes, right, is just it's diverse, right? The working class is and always has been diverse. It has always been women, LGBTQ people, immigrants, people of color, you know, like, and the more that we kind of invite and celebrate and support that, the sooner the political establishment will realize that they no longer have the ability to point at one segment of the working class and pit it against the other, because we will be united in this kind of common fight for a livable world and a notion of the common good, that it is not dictated by, you know, the fucking vultures and vampires of the capitalist class.
So, and from your lips to whatever ears look like on a flying spaghetti monster or whatever, fucking, yeah, fuck, wow, man, that was awesome. What we are up against in the face of that is a deliberate effort to make people not couple the success that they see in action, be it you know, strikes specifically, or just in generally like putting pressure on politicians. They're not making a connection that what you're doing in a strike, you can do to get the government that represents you. And I think
right, we saw that with the shutdown.
Yeah.
Right? And like everyone was like, oh, you know, like Pelosi took away the State of the Union, that must have pressured Trump. It was like, no, the second that federal workers said fuck this, it was over. The you know, the shutdown was over. Right? So, like you gestured to Big Bill Haywood earlier, right? All workers have to do, if they are organized, all the workers have to do is put their hands in their pockets, and they have the capitalist class whipped.
Yeah. And the media exists at large, corporate media exists at large to make sure people don't make that connection, because they're pounding divisive narratives into the culture, not just through what is being passed off as news or journalism, in all forms, you know, television, print, online, when they can operate in that sphere, censorship through social media, through tech monopolies who work with organizations like the Atlantic Council, who decide what is and what isn't speech in what is essentially the public sphere. The narratives are that the working class has every reason and opportunity to hate various subgroups, subgenres of the working class, and it doesn't matter what that is, doesn't matter what category it is. There's a reason to hate anybody in any category, and part of that narrative is to make sure that there are categories and new ones, I think, yeah, all the time. And independent media comes in as not just something that provides balance, which is something that we miss in our corporate media. We have no balance. It's just it's a talking point from a boardroom from manufacturers of weapons of war, or it's a talking point from a boardroom for a pharmaceutical company. There's no balance when the only person speaking is management. We provide balance to that, and we're missing balance. We're missing nuance. We're missing perspective that represents not a life less lived, but a life lived through less means. And there's no perspective in and this goes beyond just news. Again, every television show, like, it takes, like, Shameless for people to be like, oh, I can finally relate to something on TV.
God
You
damn
know?
it, Steve.
Right?
God damn it.
Fucking, oh, I get it. You know, like that shit. Or like, that's the reason those shows are successful. Game of Thrones is successful not because people relate to it or they want to fucking murder, but because it's fucking an escape. Like, nobody's actually gonna go out and have wizard dragon sex, you know? Like, yet. We're working on VR for that. They're working on VR for that. If you want to fuck a dragon, it'll probably happen before we get single payer. But at the rate we're going.
You heard it here first, folks.
We'll get you whatever kind of fuck robot you want, but you still need GoFundMe for your health care. Yeah, that's George Carlin's illusion of choice right there in 2019. 32 flavors of ice cream, 7 billion channels, one political party masquerading as two.
I mean, yeah, I think you're right, and yeah, this is, I think these are the very real stakes of kind of what we're all doing, right? These are the very real stakes of building alternative media networks, alternative, networks of solidarity, and, building a more just, dignified, democratic, way of life through the very kinds of relationships that we have with each other, and the kinds of ways that we interact with and consume, like our news about the world, right? And I think it's so pivotal in so many ways, right? Because I think it also is it is doing what we're doing here, right? Bringing our audiences in conversation with each other, bringing our respective pockets of the country, kind of like bringing them closer together, connecting our struggles, showing support. It is also, right, like getting out of those kind of preformed paths that we walk day in and day out, from our bed to our job to McDonald's to the bank to to bed again, right? Like you said, we are forced to live with fewer and fewer means for living comfortably and in a dignified way, and in that process, we lose our connections to each other, to our families, our friends, our neighbors, because we don't have money to go out. We're ashamed, of our inability to pay our bills, right? Like, we're terrified that doing or saying something on Twitter will get us fired, right? All of these ways, and actually, this was something that I thought I was really glad to see in Bernie Sanders' rebuttal to the State of the Union, because I think he learned some of this from 2016. But I had an economist on Working People, come on, and we talked about his book, Capitalism versus Freedom, and it's a really great book. But it makes the very kind of clear point that socialists need to reclaim this notion that under capitalism you are not free, right? This Rob Larson is the name of the economist, so I didn't mention it, but okay. He's like, look, we need to make the very kind of clear point that when you are saddled with debt, right, when you are locked into a locale where there are only low wage paying jobs and you don't have the money to move, right, when you are working multiple shitty jobs because none of them want to pay you full time, and so if you lose any of them you're going to be totally fucked. You are not free, right? And we tend to think of freedom as something that is only curtailed by the government, and that is not true. We are unfree in so many ways that prevent by and at the hands of so many forces in the kind of quote unquote free market, right? But we have just been trained not to see them. We've been trained to accept that as normal, and that freedom is just limited to like consumption in these kind of like bullshit tiny ways. But I think what we need to do in terms of building a class consciousness and a vision for the future is to reignite that sense of liberty and that sense of equality, justice, dignity, sustainability, to do that and to do it, like deliberately in the ways that we interact with each other. So make the connections, right? Because the life under late capitalism is pushing you away from doing that because it knows the power that we have when we actually care about one another, when we actually realize how connected our struggles are, when we realize how much power we actually have in numbers, right? To push against the kind of gears of the system, right? So like all the ways that we are pushed to be more isolated, more individualistic, more cut off from our fellow workers, right? These are kind of like preset incentives and incentive structures, right, that are built into our very way of life to keep us from collectivizing as a class, from collectivizing, as the people, and to realizing, all the ways that we are in fact being denied the chance to flourish together, and to make the most of our collective labor power, our collective, the environment that we share, right? There's so much potential in humanity and so much beauty, right, in our ability to live harmoniously with our
Thank you.
environment that is just squandered by capitalism and used only like for the purposes of making profits for a few fuckheads, right? And we as leftists need to tap into that massive well of potential, right? And I think that is what we are seeing, both in like the big ways when communities are rallying behind workers who are striking for a vision of a better, more just political economy. But it's also what we see when, like my dad, who was a lifelong Republican voter, starts talking to people when he's driving them to Uber and starts to realize that he has more in common with them than he does the Republican Party leadership, right? But like all these ways that we are kind of need to push ourselves to talk to one another. That's what working people is all about, right? That's the guiding philosophy of my show, is that in establishing these connections and hearing each other out and sharing our stories, we can actually start to like rediscover that human potential that we all have within us and that we have together to build a more livable world, a better world, a happier world, a less murderous and exploitative and discriminatory world. And I think that in any ways that we can, whether that's promoting each other's work, whether that's going to local unions and saying, I want to help, right? Whether that is going to your neighbors and offering to do their laundry, like so that they can have a little more time with their kids, and then that leads to like more and more people in your apartment complex realizing that you can provide for each other what you're told you can only get by buying it, like out of and using your paycheck, to get it, right? Like these very ways that we have to build not only the structures for a better world, but the consciousness that will allow us to want and fight for that world. We have to do that in all these small ways with each other and for each other. And I think that is why what you guys are doing at Slow News, to bring on other shows, to highlight, other organizations, and that's what we're trying to do this season with Working People. It's so important. It's important when you talk to your neighbors in a way that like you just typically don't. It's important when you talk to your coworkers and listen to them. It's important when you go to an ununionized workplace and just hear people out instead of telling them what they need to do, right? It's important. All of this is important. We need all of it, and I think we need to support each other in that effort.
Fuck yeah.
I love it. That's a great message.
Sorry, I went a little long there.
Nah, dude. That's fucking.
I was thinking
it,
teachers are the are great for somebody as far as like spearheading and being out there in the front, but I'm also thinking about the power that they have at their disposal to tell our kids the truth.
And that they don't
And I
do
think
it.
they're starting to, well, it's only been recently, to be fair, that, you know,
'Cause
last 10 or
Christopher-
15 years that we've figured out the whole of Texas Instruments is a lie.
Because Christopher Columbus and how fucked is it? Okay, so let me ask you a theoretical question, because the guys, Bernie's probably gonna run for president. He hasn't announced yet. I think he's waiting to see who bows out earlier first. Tulsi Gabbard is ignored entirely by the media, except for when they have her on to smear her or write a story that she is the Kremlin's favorite presidential candidate. That happened on NBC. That was a thing that happened. Bernie, according to the DNC, would have to change his party affiliation to Democrat first in order to be able to run. And then he would have to, you know, run inside the DNC with their 3 different versions of Hillary Clinton and their couple different versions of Barack Obama and their fucking whatever the shit Joe Biden is, fucking Grandpa Grow-Between, fucking just piece of shit, fucking warmonger and
Oh dear.
It's it seems like
How about we just end on the message that fuck Joe Biden.
all right, man.
We
That
could
sounds
totally do
great
that.
to me. Maximillian Alvarez, it has been fucking great talking to you, man. I enjoyed the shit out of this. Working People podcast. You're doing a fucking fantastic thing with that show. I can't encourage people
Keep building bridges.
to go check that out enough. Yeah.
Keep building bridges.
Oh yeah, well, comrades, thank you so much for having me on. Keep doing what you're doing. I can't wait to see who else you bring on the show. To everyone out there, if you want to check us out, if the podcast is Working People. It's on iTunes, Spotify. You can find us on Twitter at WorkingPod. As always, we need Patreon subscribers. You get bonus episodes there. I gotta have you guys on to do a bonus episode sometime to talk about what's going on in the mountains. But yeah, keep supporting independent left media. Keep supporting each other's efforts to dig out of this fucking, hellhole. Because the only way that we're going to be able to do it is together.
Together, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right, man.
Thanks, guys.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
All right. Solidarity.
Good luck to us all.